Kelly here. In today's episode, Gary Quinn shares his journey to now, the power of questions, and what it's like to be the editor of the content studio of the Irish Times. He also speaks about winning the gold at the Golden Media Awards. It's fair to say Gary and his team create incredible videos, production, print and digital. You're in for an absolute treat in this episode and look forward to your feedback. See you soon. Bye. Hey, it's Mark Kelly here. Welcome to What I Know Now. For those who don't know, What I Know Now is a leadership and personal development podcast where I ask people from all walks of life, what do you know now that you wish you knew before? Or if you were to have a coffee with your younger self, what advice would you offer? Today's guest is Gary Quinn. Gary is the editor of the Irish Times Content Studio. Hi Gary, how are you?
Hi Mark, very well, thank you.
So you're back just a couple of weeks from New York after winning a very prestigious award. So I just want to say a massive congratulations.
Thank you very much.
I saw the winning award. It was fantastic. I'd see massive potential to do, but to win an award, I looked across. It was 36 countries from the different places.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe 40.
40 countries. Wow! And there was several hundred applications that went in for it.
Yeah, it was the INMA Award, the Global Media Awards, and they're run by the International News Media Association. And so they're hosted in different cities each year. Last year they were in London. This year they were in New York, and we've been entering them for a few years. Last year we got our first nominations. This year we got nominated again, and we went along really just delighted that we got nominated because we got nominated in two categories, and one category in particular, which is the native category, and that's the area I work in, native publishing. It's a new area, very, very competitive. All of the newspapers are involved in it, and so we went along delighted. We got nominated up against some really big name publishers, and we won gold. So we were nominated the best native in the world, which is kind of bizarre when I think about it.
When you were sitting in the audience waiting for the award, were you looking left and right and thinking, "Wow"?
Yeah, because I didn't meet the other two nominees. I tried to find them, and there's a great old place. We were in the Harvard Club in Manhattan, and this is this old school wooden paneled, white glove butlers all over the place, and it was just a very prestigious place to be. And then to have that in New York and to be surrounded by all the other newspapers, and we're sitting to the Guardian at our table, and the Economist are over here, and all of the other non-traditional media were there. And so it was just an awful lot of fun, and it was a really great atmosphere. And then to win it outright it was a big surprise.
Yeah.
I don't think any other Irish publisher has ever brought home a Global Media Award from this particular competition, and it's our benchmark, I guess. INMA is our benchmark for how we want to do things, and so for them to award you be the best, it's a big honor. So we were delighted with that.
From watching it myself, you see yourself swimming along with the person, and it's just an incredible experience.
For this particular campaign, yeah. So this campaign was with Audi, and so it was called the tagline for it was the best of both worlds, and they came to us and said, okay, we want to align. So they wanted to align their car, which was a hybrid Audi, with this idea of the best of both worlds. And so we could have gone around it a few different ways, but it was one of those. I just started in the job. It was actually the first time that we really went out of our way to try and do this the way that we thought was the best way to do it. And so they were brilliant to work with, and we sat down and talked out the different options. But I had met this woman called Nuala Moore, who is the ice swimmer, and this is the story of the ice swimmer. And I had met her, and I had reported on her previously. I was down, and she lives in Dingle, and I had been down in Dingle, and I met her on a different story, and I just thought her story was remarkable, what she does. She travels all over the world and competes in swims which are in ice, in water that's literally frozen, and they're breaking the ice in front of her. And there are videos of her on YouTube where they're literally smashing the ice as she swims because it's freezing again so quickly. And so this was the story. This is the person I wanted to feature, and I thought, look, if we tell her story and align that with your car in Dingle and capture this idea of the best of both worlds, but also show an environment where this car was a hybrid, so they wanted to be seen to be in an environment where hybrids and green issues matter, and so you've got this incredible landscape, and so it really resonated with people.
When I watched it, it's like for a couple of minutes, you feel like you're there, and you feel like you're just in this motion picture, caught in the moment, and so much is given in so little time, and then at the end, it's so slickly done with the car, and then this little click of the kind of that Audi noise, but it's just so so compelling, but also the brand aspect, it really worked well, the hybrid of it.
I think it came across well. Like, we worked with a brilliant crew called Stream About on that video, and they produced that, and they did an incredible job on it. And it was probably the second time we worked with them, and we worked with different videographers, but this was a really special one. And when we came up with the idea, and we said, look, we want to tell a very distinctly Irish story, and we want to tell a story which is bigger than the brand, but reflects very well on the brand. And so we set about doing that, and Streambout did a beautiful job of that, and just how they captured her and just the look and the feel of it is just carried again and again and again. So people respond to it. So it's great.
So it's going through some of our stats before our interview. You've got well over 1.6 million views of some of the videos.
Some of the videos have been brilliant. What we do in the Irish Times, it's the Irish Times Content Studio, and it's only been set up just a little over a year. And we were last to market with it. And that was because, I guess, as a brand overall, the Irish Times wanted to be sure we were doing this correctly, and that it wouldn't in any way damage the Irish Times integrity and news brand and all of that, because we're doing this and it has a commercial basis, and it's part of the future of the newspaper. It's part of the future of all newspapers to look at how they're telling brand stories, and it's worked very successfully for us, both with readers who've responded to what we've done really well, but also, of course, we're making an income from it as well, and that's very important.
So can you give us a little bit of background about how your journey to now and how you ended up here?
Well, my journey to now, I've done an awful lot of things over the years, and journalism is probably something I came to quite late. You know, I studied computer science. I never worked in it. I worked for the Irish Refugee Council. I worked in anti-racism. I set up anti-racism projects, EU-funded projects, lots of different things moving around. And it was actually someone who went on to be a mentor of mine who got me into journalism. Really, it really wasn't one of my goals at all. It was never a goal of mine, and I hadn't done terribly well academically at school, and I dropped out of college in various things, as lots of people do. And but I was doing quite well in the NGO sector, and I really, really enjoyed it. And it was a classic kind of guy in his early 20s, want to save the world kind of thing, you know. And I really enjoyed it. And I was working. It was when people started coming to Ireland for the first time, and I was working as a caseworker with the Refugee Council. Everything was changing really, really fast. Lots of different nationalities were moving here. And then on the back of that, I ended up working on an anti-racism project called the Cities Anti-Racism Project. And from that, I ended up working with the NUJ, the National Union of Journalists, on an anti-racism project, because they wanted to say, we've got to work in this area. There was a lot of stuff happening in the press at the time. So I was working with someone there who recommended me then, who said, really, I guess, at the end of it all, said, so anyway, what was your degree in? And I said, well, actually, I don't have a degree. I wasn't hiding the fact I didn't have one, but I didn't volunteer that fact at the outset either. And he goes, well, that's crazy. You should have something, you know. So DCU and in fact, DIT are very similar, and I applied to them both, and they were very open to the idea of having mature students. I was only about 25, 26 at this stage, and applied to the MA, and with their support. So the NUJ, so Seamus Dooley, who was the head of the NUJ then here in Ireland, he still is, supported my application, and so DCU were very open to that, and suddenly I was doing a master's. So within 12 months then, it was a master's in journalism, and suddenly I came out the other side of that, and you know how quickly a year goes, you fly through a year, and suddenly I've got a master's, and I'm supposedly a journalist. You know, and so I was like, wow, what am I going to do now? You know, so that was a really great thing that happened, and it was obviously a big change for me to go from not qualified for anything, and no real professional experience, lots of NGO experience, but as I learned, that doesn't really carry you very far in business, to suddenly having a master's in journalism. So I didn't start here in the Irish Times, of course. I actually ended up working in online, because online, there was money in online. These were when was this? This would have been the late 90s, early 2000s. There was a bit of money in online. You could get a real job in online, online-only new organizations and new media companies. I met a woman one night at a book launch, having a glass of wine, and she had seen some work I had done with the Irish traveller movement, some layouts that I had done, and she offered me a job here in the Irish Times, freelance shifts, one-off kind of things, and it was just, and I went, that's great, and I went home and I said to my wife, yeah, I've just been offered a job in the Irish Times, and thought that was very funny, and I did nothing about it. And then I got a phone call from my friend in the NUJ and said, did you meet someone from the Irish Times who offered you work? And I said, yeah, it was really funny. And she goes, well, why didn't you turn up? And I was because I didn't believe her. I didn't think you could get a job in the Irish Times like that. No, it wasn't a full-time job. Yes, and he said, well, you've got one more opportunity. She says if you call her, she'd give you one more chance because she really meant it and she thought you were going to turn up and you didn't ring her. So I did, and she's become a very good friend since. So she gave me a start, and that was in the production side and doing layouts and editing. And it was very much entry level part of the paper, and then I've been with them ever since. That was about 11 years ago or more maybe, and just worked up from there to all the different, I've done a bunch of different jobs around here since.
It's kind of a sliding doors moment.
Yeah, it's just been in the, you know, it's one of these things where you meet somebody and they give you an opportunity, and I just didn't believe it, but it was a fabulous opportunity. I can't imagine. I don't know where I would have gone had I not, because you know, look, the Irish Times is a real thing in Irish society, and for whatever you might think of it as a newspaper or whatever your own preferences are, it's had real impact on society here.
Of course.
And so it matters. It's a place that matters. So to get a chance to get inside it and to work here, I'm very lucky.
Yeah,
I'm really glad.
Have you had an important mentor throughout your life?
I've had a few, like the guy I mentioned earlier from the NUJ, Seamus Dooley was a mentor. I think I've had others, one or two others that have really helped me at different stages. The woman I mentioned earlier with the glass of wine in the bookshop, you know, she became a real strong mentor to me as well. And so there have been different people at different times, and I've always been surprised how ready people are to help younger people up, you know, and I guess we don't expect that in life, and it's only in recent years I've been doing a lot of work with different projects here internally, and they're all business related, and we might be hosting events and what have you, and I'd be on stage interviewing people, business people, about mentorship, and so I've become very interested in it, and how surprising it is how, like I say, people are so ready to be mentors. They don't even want to call it that, but they're ready to help, and that's always been really surprising to me, and I think we don't get taught that enough as we grow up. Maybe in Ireland, maybe it's an Irish thing, but you know, you're taught not to ask for help almost, or not encouraged to ask for help, but when you finally get the courage to do it, it's all there and people are ready to go, and I'm like, wow, I wish I'd thought of that 10 years ago. If only I'd asked that question 10 years ago, I would be so much further along, or things would have been that little bit easier.
Do you know, I can really relate to that, and I'm less than a year just doing podcasting, and vast majority of people I reach out to and just ask them for questions, assistance, help, advice, topics. They're so forthcoming with us, and one of the first interviews I did was with Pat Falvey, and I'm not sure if you know Pat. He started doing polar exploring, but at the age of 16 he left school and he said, I'm going to be a multimillionaire. I don't know how, but I'm going to become a multimillionaire, and he became a brickie, and at 18 he was nowhere near becoming a multimillionaire. But he went and he just reached out to the leading property developers at the time and said, I want to become multi-millionaire, really, really successful, can you help me? And they go, yeah, and they showed him the ropes, and by 21 he had hit his goal, and all it was just asking the right questions.
It is, but also it's about having a goal, because I think not everyone, like I never had a goal, and I kind of drift, and I very much believed in this idea that, you know, put yourself out in the world and just drift along, and very much like a leaf in a river kind of thing, you know what I mean? Let's see where you go, and that's very enjoyable. I probably lost a good few years, very enjoyable years in my 20s to that, just, you know, just drifting through. And it's a parent's worst nightmare, I guess, to watch the kids just drift. Now, I, at the same time, probably needed it. I needed to mature a little bit. I needed to go out and experience life a little bit. I probably experienced too much of life, maybe. But it was all very enjoyable, and my wife was, we met in our mid-20s, and she was probably in the same boat, and we both kind of drifted along for a few years. When I look back at that, I think, oh, it was a real waste of a few years, because we didn't have goals. It was probably only until we were in our 30s we started going, hang on, what actually do we want? And then we go after it. But at the same time, I wouldn't give those years away, because I had incredible experiences, and when I talk it out with people, I realized that other people didn't have a lot of experiences, that they got to work straight away, and so they missed out.
That's the flip, because I ask people who have achieved their goals, who've been very, very clear, and they had a burning desire where they had that goal, and then I ask them, in hindsight, do you think that goal cost too much? Because you always have to give something to achieve the goal, right? And at the time you believe it is important, and sometimes they say, hey, I had massive sacrifices down in reflection. I didn't get to see my kids grow up. I got divorced, whatever, but they do this. So yeah, it can be an interesting one.
Yeah, well, there is. There's always a payback, depending on what choice you take. Of course, you always look back and go, but if I had done that, and if I had done that, and that's the perpetual, particularly middle-aged men like myself, start going, oh, what if, you know.
Best piece of advice you received, can you think back to us, or a moment? Or
the one thing I usually say is, somebody once said to me that if you want to convince someone, or if you want someone to come on board with you, dress like them.
Okay.
Which really resonated with me
Wow.
because I would care what I wear, but I would be quite casual, I guess, and I would maybe be a little bit mix and match. Some days I'd be very formal, some days I'd be casual. But that she said, honestly, just people won't trust you unless they see themselves in you in some way. So I've applied that a few times over the years, and I found it works.
Give me an example. That's fascinating.
I don't know. Like, I think that if I were to, and that was somebody who was very successful in the NGO sector and who are traditionally very casual and very laid back, but you want big government ministers to introduce, legislation or policies or ideas that are very left wing and perhaps you don't agree with. And she felt like if we go in here and we're dressed not like business people, not like professional people, that they just won't trust you.
Right.
And so she said that, and I went, gosh, she's right. And I applied that in different scenarios, and I realized that you do, of course, because if you're trying to convince someone, whether it's in a job interview, and we all do it in a job interview, we all dress up and try to look like the person that we're trying to be. But actually, all through life, the people judge you all the time, and if you're aware of that, and if you can take control of it in your looks, people will say to you, well, you shouldn't care about that, that's not important. But actually, if you want to convince someone, you can use it.
It's kind of tying back to a little bit act as if, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where they say, if you want to get that job, you start dressing like your manager.
Yeah, exactly.
And you start doing the same behaviours, and people will just naturally associate you with that.
And you can be quite cynical about it and say, well, you're selling out or whatever, but if you're using it and if you're in full knowledge and you say, I'm doing this to get to this goal, and if you're like me, who had no goals until the 30s, no real tangible goals until the 30s, you got to do it fast and you got to work quickly. So you've got to use those little tricks to, I guess, get ahead. But I don't know. I found it very useful because it made me think a little bit about how I was presenting myself to people.
It's very, 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 very good advice. Can you think back when maybe you had some challenges throughout your life where things weren't going to plan, where there was maybe a pattern of failure, and was there any areas there?
I don't know about a pattern of failure. Like, I failed loads of stuff through the years, and so I'm not terribly afraid of failure. I would say I'm a very smart guy, but I didn't apply myself all through school and college, and so I would have failed, like literally failed lots and lots of things, including Intercert, Leaving Cert, all of those things. But the one thing that I did want to change about myself, and it happened when I was around 21. I was a very, very quiet person. I'm not a quiet person anymore, and people laugh when I tell them this story. But I was incredibly quiet. I used to work in a pub from about 15 till maybe 25. I worked as a barman, and in the pub at home in Monaghan, I was called the quiet man because I never spoke. I didn't speak to anyone, and it's strange to be a barman and not speak to anyone. I was terrified to speak. I couldn't speak. I was incredibly shy.
That must be a first.
Huh?
It must be a first, the quiet barman.
Well, yeah, this is it, because you don't survive. But I had I guess the guy that was training me up, the owner of the bar, was very, very patient, because I wasn't a good barman either at the start. But he gave me the work and he trained me up and he stuck with it and he never got rid of me. And I didn't speak, and it's very frustrating for people, because you come into a bar and you want to talk to the barman if you're on your own. But I couldn't do it. But anyway, so by the time I got to hit 21, and I was going to parties and I was the guy sitting in the corner not speaking to anybody, and I just got so incredibly fed up with it. And maybe this is the best advice I ever got, actually. Maybe this is a better piece of advice. But a friend of mine, she could talk to anyone. And I just admired that. And I could talk to her privately, that was fine. But at a party, she'd be leading, all the conversations, and I'd just be sitting there afraid to speak to anyone. So I said to her, I said, how do you do it? Like, how do you become a sociable person? And she said, you just ask questions. If you don't have anything to say, just ask them a question, because everybody loves talking about themselves. And I went, oh, and I started doing it. And I started, because I honestly didn't want to be this guy anymore who couldn't speak for anyone. And I started asking, and I realized every time I asked a question, it worked, and your confidence grows. And now I can talk to anybody, and I do. Do you know what I mean? I talk for Ireland, and it was such good advice. And she probably doesn't even remember saying it to me, but it was a real moment, and I've lived on it ever since.
And you made that decision once she said that to apply it?
Yeah, because I was really hungry for a solution. I didn't want to be this guy who was terrified of everything all the time. Yeah. And so I knew I had to speak up. And I meet quiet people all the time now, and people who you can see are very close in themselves. And maybe some people like to be like that, but my belief is, particularly in a work scenario, you don't want to be that person, because you've got so much more to say. Yeah. You just can't get it out. So I try to bring, I tell that story a lot, and people are surprised at it, but also I would try to bring people out of themselves.
Do you count yourself as lucky?
Yeah, really, really lucky.
Okay.
I actually think I'm a very lucky person. People say it to me all the time, oh, you always land on your feet. But I go after an awful lot of things, you see, and this is the thing. And so I guess people only see the successful things. I'm sure that there are lots of things that didn't work out for me, but now, in my mid-40s, and I look back on all of the things I've done, and I go, yeah, actually, cracky. I'm really, really lucky,
Yeah.
you know.
I like asking that question, because if you ask people that question, and if they say, I'm really unlucky, it's been negative, you can pretty much determine what type of conversation you're going to have with people, where you can see their mindset, are they relatively successful, just in life really. But luckily you answered upbeat, positive, are going to be the different
but you know, look, it's that truth, you know, that everybody says you make your own luck, and it is about being open-minded. And you know, if you sit in a room all day and never engage with people, you're not going to get those opportunities, and therefore you can't measure your luck. But you know, you got to go out and look for them.
Would you say there's a tip that you've learned in your later years that you'd love to go back and start applying when you were a little bit younger?
It could be argued that I wasted a bunch of years in my 20s, but I am the person I am because of them. So I'm very much a believer in that. I think probably everybody would go back and tell themselves not to give themselves such a hard time, you know, and not to carry guilt or worry about things that you can't control, and also maybe to slow down a bit, because I just am the kind of person who tries to do things very, very fast all the time. And so if I don't succeed very quickly, then I'll put that away and I'll move on to something else. And there are things I've done in my life that I thought, that's not working out, I'll move on to something else. And then when you look back in hindsight, you go, I should have stuck with that because I was doing really well at it, but I couldn't see it. Yeah. And because I was going too fast. And I was expecting success too quickly and expecting other people to recognize me and my success too quickly. And had I just slowed the hell down and just took a big deep breath, I would have gone, actually, I'm in a good place.
What do you believe that other people probably don't, or what opinion do you have that's probably a little bit out there that people think, you're crazy if you're out for a drink after work, and you say, well, I actually think it...
One of the things I failed at miserably at school, and in fact I was of the mindset was Irish, and I was of the mindset that Irish had no value, and I would have been one of these teenagers who would have argued with you all day as to why Irish has no role in Ireland. And as I became older, my wife's Croatian, and we went off to live there for a few years, and I learned Croatian, I speak Croatian, and I realized, hang on, that's a much harder language to learn than Irish. And I started going, I should really try and learn Irish. So I went back to learning Irish. And I really like Irish language now, and I really see its role, and I see the role of a language, not just Irish language, but any language in a country and in an identity. And so I'm very much of the mindset that if we really allow it to die, we're really losing something very, very important, and something which is a root to who we are as a nationality. And I think as the world becomes more and more internationalized, you need those roots. And it's not enough to have a national personality, which Irish people certainly have, and it's very strong. And it's not enough to have a very strong sense of where you're from. That language has a role in that too, and all the things come with that, and the poetry and the song and the stories that would also all die with it, and all that's gone. But that's so incredibly boring for most Irish people. Like, they don't want to hear it, and they get stuck in this argument about schooling and education. But it's really not that. I don't believe that is the problem. I really believe that the problem lies with parents and their appreciation and their own hang-ups about the education, their own hang-ups about why they can't speak something, and it's more about what they don't have than what they do have. And I really think that it's in the home that the Irish language can be. All you need to give a kid is a sense that the Irish language matters. You don't have to teach them how to speak or her to speak Irish. You just have to teach them that it has value. And I've done that with my kids. And they can all speak good Irish from school, but they like Irish, and they're not afraid of it.
So you believe you've helped with that?
Yeah, it's simply by instilling a sense of value in it, that it matters, that languages in general matter, not just the Irish language, Spanish and Croatian and what have you. That languages matter, and that the English language is just another language alongside all of the others. And so I believe that. Most people I know don't believe that. Most people say doesn't really matter, Gary. Yeah. It doesn't really matter if we never speak Irish again for the rest of our lives. Who cares? But I passionately believe that we're so close to it.
The reality is you've actually gone and done that, and you've gone and actually made the decision to learn it. My wife's an Irish teacher, so she's obviously very passionate about that, and I personally would love to see my kids speaking it, but I feel guilty when we're ever down in Connemara or wherever, when I'm the only one person that can't speak it. And I start to feel a bit like, even around the being come on, I'm like, do I know every word? Oh, question mark.
And most people don't. Like, but it is terribly, it's probably the only, I've traveled an awful lot now, and it's probably the only country I've been in where knowing a language somehow marks you down as a little bit less. You know, in other countries, learning a language, you get a mark, you get a badge for that. Whereas here, if you are, Irish, it almost puts you down a step, which doesn't make sense to me. It should raise you up. It should, he speaks another language. He's bilingual or she's bilingual or whatever. And it doesn't. So, but there's so much focus on somehow the problem being just in the schools. And I think it's really unfair. I think it's unfair to your wife, it's a teacher, and I think it's unfair to kind of everyone who's gone through it, because it's not the lack of proficiency in the language is the problem, it's the sense of the belief in it as being valuable. That's missing. My parents never taught me that. My parents didn't really have a value on the Irish language. My mother's an English teacher and really had a value on that, and didn't really care if I spoke Irish, and I didn't care that was the first thing that I started failing at school. We had no value on it, and so I had to learn that it matters, and so that's the thing.
So sitting back a couple of weeks ago, I was thinking, this guy's got the best job in the world. And I was looking at all the different adverts that you've made in terms of the different people you've got to work with from completely different backgrounds. When I was reading about Honduras, and obviously you're doing work with, was it Kenko at the time, but it was just so interesting because it was so diverse, so many different types of experience. You really kind of immersed yourself in those experiences. You got to know so many different types of people as well. Do you find you really just develop a different type of personality, kind of grow from those experiences? Because so many people can be doing the same things over and over.
Well, I don't know, like I like storytelling and I like meeting people, and so that's a really good combination. And I love traveling, so that's another really good combo. But someone else could work with those same brands with the same goals of selling the brand name, and do it a totally different way. With the Honduras one, I got the opportunity to jump in a plane and fly to Honduras, and it's a very complicated country, and the security situation there is terrible, and poverty and the economy and everything is awful.
That's a big stat. What was the stat per
well, it was the most dangerous country in the world. It was the most insecure. It was the highest murder rate. At that time, it was the highest murder rate in the world. Now it's the country next to it, but it's only like a couple of deaths in between it. Like, people do get killed there an awful lot, and we got a little bit of criticism around that, because we said it. We were saying it's the most dangerous country in the world outside a war zone, obviously, and it's not a safe place to be in. But the people are fabulous, and they're really warm, and they're very educated, and they're full of life, and very down to earth, and have been through an awful lot, or at least have seen an awful lot, in the same way that in Northern Ireland people have seen an awful lot. Maybe they haven't been experienced at face value, but most people know someone who has. So that was a really, really interesting thing. And I got to go back there a second time and document a training course there that Kenko were running for young people from communities where they were likely to end up in gangs. So gangs control everything there and create the crime and all of that kind of stuff. So a lot of drug trafficking and what have you. People were quite cynical about the fact that Kenko was doing this, but it was very real. And when I got there, and we were cynical too, we were like, well, what's it going to be like when we got there? But what we met were a bunch of young people who'd been given fantastic opportunities to set up businesses, and had their businesses funded with interest-free loans, and had land bought for them, and trained up in industries that they would never have got into otherwise. It's a really small group of people. In the bigger Honduras question, now it's a drop in the ocean, but for those kids who were involved, it was the world to them. A huge difference. Gave them opportunities they'd never had before, and they all told me that again and again and again. And every time I meet someone, it's a bit like with the ice swimmer we talked about earlier. I met her on a story of meeting. I was interviewing her sister, actually, who runs the Dingle whiskey distillery. I was down there. I literally got locked into a whiskey distillery for the weekend, which was fabulous. And at the end of it, I met her sister, and I went, wow, it was a great story. But I like that. I like to go out of my way to meet people.
So my last question, you kind of answered it, to be fair, during the interview, but I'll ask it again. So if you had a conversation with your 18-year-old self, and it was a coffee, 5 minutes, what advice do you think you'd offer?
Yeah, I think what I was saying earlier, I'd say to slow the hell down and enjoy what you're doing and believe in yourself, and probably all the typical things that a person would say, like, we're so unsure of ourselves at 18 and think that we're supposed to know everything. I don't know if it's common or not, but I always felt at whatever age you might pick that I was older than I was, and that I should be more responsible than I was, and should carry more guilt about why I wasn't responsible. Like I when I think back now, when I was 30, you know, when I was 29, I did my master's, and we had our daughter, and we got married, and and I was like, got to do all these things before I'm 30, because in my mind 30 was this crazy old age. So thought the same at 40. I'd probably think the same when I hit 50. But when you look back, you realize there was so much more to do, and you can do so much more than you're doing. I think I tell myself, yeah, just slow the hell down and appreciate the day or whatever. It's all this mindfulness stuff that we're learning now. That's what I needed then, I guess.
Yeah, it's good advice. Gary, I could speak to you all day. That actually flew by. Thank you very much. Really appreciate
Mark,
it.
thank you. Jesus.
Thank you.
That was good fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And to subscribe to the podcast, just stick in WIKN into iTunes, SoundCloud, or your Android podcast of choice. I'd love to get your feedbacks and thoughts from today's interview with Gary. If you want to check out more blogs or my podcasts or videos, check www.wikn.co. Have a super week, and I hope you take massive action.